It's all right. We're a casual group. Good evening to those of you who are online, might be clicking in or watching this later. I'm Rabbi Tobin. We're at B'nai Shalom in West Orange, New Jersey. Thank you, Al. Al makes a mean cup of coffee around here, I hear. And tonight we're going to be studying Talmud. This is the first Talmud class that we've really taught here in quite some time. 2 weeks ago, and in the library of previous videos, you'll find an introduction to Talmud, where we talked about what Talmud is, where it comes from, what are the components of a traditional Talmud page, and all of those things. So we're going to try not to repeat that information tonight, and we're actually going to dive into a page of Talmud. Every page of Talmud is its own world. Talmud is 2,552 folio pages. I'm putting into the chat box here a link that those of you who are online should go to, which will send you to Sefaria, and we're going to be beginning chapter 2 of Tractate Chagiga, which is in Chagiga, page 11b. It starts, as does every chapter of Talmud, with a Mishnah. And it's because of this Mishnah that tonight's class has its title. And the title is Forbidden Teachings in the Talmud, which, sounds kind of sexy. People are going to want to know about that, right? If you don't want a kid to do something, tell them to do it. And if you want them to do it, tell them not to do it. So as soon as you say you're teaching something forbidden, people get interested, right? So there's an irony in this Mishnah. The Mishnah is interrupting the flow of the Mishnayot in this tractate. As we said before, Mishnah is broken into 6 large volumes. The volume that we're in tonight is called Moed, which is about all of the holidays and the sacred days of the Jewish calendar and how to observe them. It comes from a time when the temple was destroyed, but not so long ago. And so they are still talking about the things you would have had to do that are associated with temple worship, animal sacrifices, obligations for pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and all those things, because they were hoping those things would return soon. On the other hand, they're writing it all down because they've gotten an inkling by the year 200 that it ain't coming back today. And you need to write it all down or people are going to lose track of it. So the tractate Chagiga gets its name from the Hebrew word chogeg, which means to festivus. As what's his name? As Seinfeld would say, it's a festivus. You have to make a festival. It is actually related to a word that you may not realize, which is the Arabic, the Muslim practice of Hajj. Making pilgrimage to Mecca comes from the same word. Hajj in Arabic is Hagag in Hebrew, which is to make pilgrimage. So we have pilgrimage festivals to Jerusalem, same word, same idea, only in the ancient world, our ancient world, which is much older than Islam, making pilgrimage meant offering a sacrifice. Every person had to offer a Chag or a Chagiga sacrifice. And at some point during the holiday, it's not like Passover where it has to happen on the 14th of Nisan. This was when you make your pilgrimage, don't show up in Jerusalem empty-handed, which is the command that Kol Zechorecha Lo Yira'eh Rekam, that any of your males who make pilgrimage need to have something to offer. And then, of course, there's an adjustment. If you're poor, it could be down to a turtle dove or even a handful of flour. Right? But you're supposed to bring an animal. That's the ideal. So in Tractate Chagiga, in the Mishnah, they talk about your obligations. No surprise. At the end of chapter 1, however, they got distracted. And they got distracted by this idea of if you didn't bring it, when can you bring it? And if the festival is almost over or the festival is over, are you able to still bring your Chagiga and fulfill the obligation? Which was responded to with a quote from Kohelet, which is an interesting thing to do because the Mishnah doesn't often quote Kohelet or one of the lesser writings for its halachic reasoning. And the verse from Kohelet is that That which is broken cannot be repaired. That which is twisted cannot be made straight. In other words, you blew it, some things can't be fixed, right? But then they have, in the Mishnah, which is highly unusual, they have a little midrashic argument about what does that mean? What is the thing that can't be made straight? And then they talk about whether or not that is chas v'shalom, a mamzer, meaning somebody has had a forbidden sexual union and they were fruitful and multiplied, and the child unfortunately is born into a status which in biblical law is highly problematic. Nobody else can marry them except someone else born in that same status. And so that is something that is unable to be fixed, right? So that is their example. Then someone else comes and says, no, it's not that. The person who gets, the thing that gets fixed, you don't fix something that wasn't originally okay and then got broken. You don't call that fixing. If you just are fixing something all by itself, that's called building. So what could be fixed? Well, it has to have been something that was good, then got broken, and now can't get fixed. And what is that? And they say it's a Talmud, Chacham, it's a Torah scholar who leaves Judaism for external philosophies and beliefs. And that person can never be redeemed entirely. Once they've gone that road, they're almost irreparable. And that Mishnah ends. And then all of a sudden, chapter 2 comes along in Tractate Chagiga, where you're supposed to be talking about your pilgrimage sacrifice, and we get tonight's topic. So now that you've seen that the last Mishnah of chapter 1 brought up the implications of forbidden sexual unions, and also brought in the implications of foreign speculative philosophical thinking, both of which were considered to be doing irreparable damage to the ideal situation of the rabbinic world, now it makes sense that this Mishnah is the next thing they say. Now, what doesn't make sense is why it starts a new chapter. One would think this Mishnah would be a continuation of the previous chapter, and I've gone and I've studied all of the manuscripts that we have on this thing, and they all start a new chapter with this Mishnah, which is just a mystery, because the Mishnah after this does not continue the thought. They're going to get back to their other topics really quickly. So with all of that background, does anyone have any question about how we've kind of set the table? Yes.
The guys who were talking about the Talmud Chacham, who moved away from scholarship because of foreign ideas, were those who...
With my background information, the question was, those guys who were rabbis who left it behind and then did all this other stuff because of their intellectual curiosity, were they still friends with the person who is saying that they're irreparable?
I'm thinking that they're...
Do you have irreparable friends?
Well, I'm thinking that they were referring
Scallywags.
to Elisha ben Tabuya, and I'm also thinking... Acher, yes.
Yeah. We have a story of Acher, Elisha ben Abuya, who does this, and he maintains his student-pupil friendship relationship with Rabbi Meir, and the other rabbis are uncomfortable with that, but yet it continues. So perhaps this matches the other stories of rabbis who yatsu le tarbut ra'ah. We don't have a named person other than Elisha ben Abuya who gets called Acher, the other one. He's the classical case. But I don't want to get too distracted there. I just want to note that since that was the end of chapter 1, all of a sudden this Mishnah makes a lot of sense. Because the Mishnah we're about to read brings in strange topics. You could say these topics are strange bedfellows. For those who read ahead, you'll chuckle. The rest, hopefully, you'll give me a polite, professional laugh in a short while. And my screen is saying, trying to reconnect. You know, that's really the job of the rabbi in Judaism. We're constantly trying to reconnect with our people. Hopefully you're all there now. There we go, we're live. Okay. So I'm going to call on people to read and ask some questions as we go. Now, we're going to get the Mishnah under our belts first, and then we're going to dive into Talmud. And remember, the goal is Talmud, and this class will have a hard stop at 8 o'clock for Minyan, and because there's no way we can finish any significant amount of Talmud in 1 hour class anyways. Talmud is supposed to be a daily experience that you incorporate into your lives. The people who study Talmud do daily study, and if you do a full front and back page every day, it takes you 7.5 years to make your way through the entire Talmud. So we're just going to do the tip of a tip of a tip of Talmud tonight, hopefully get you a little interested, with the idea being anybody after tonight who wants to continue this study and set a regular fixed time for Talmud class, maybe this will create a group who would like to begin to do that. Okay, very good. Let's start. Let's just go on my left, and if I call next person and you don't want to read, just say pass, and we'll move around a little bit. So Mishnah. We are using the Schottenstein publication from ArtScroll for our in-class reading here. It's a wonderful, popular publication. It really spells out, usually according to Rashi, exactly what the Mishnah means. Let me just tell you, as you look at it, the font is important to distinguish. Plain font is not in the Mishnah or the Talmud. Plain font, not bold, not italics, not capitalized, is explanation from the editor of this Talmud series. Once you get to any Hebrew letters, they're all in the original. If they're in bold, they're all in the original. Once you get bold words, fonts, words in bold font, they are literal translations of the words that are in the Mishnah or the Talmud. And then you'll see it'll be like bold words, then non-bold words, and then more bold words and non-bold words. That's because Talmud is written in a very terse style, and it won't use all the words of a sentence. It will say, school bus, stop, red. And you need to know that that's telling you that a school bus has a rule that you have to stop when the lights are red. Right? And so what this version does is it fills in all those other words to help you with the tersity of the original, okay? Terseness of the original. The next thing you'll see is that if it's in italics, it is a quote of something that's from another source, usually Torah or Tanakh. And then if it is in all caps, that is a quote from another rabbinic source authoritative of the same level as the Mishnah. So those of you who were in the last class, you know that the Mishnah is their authoritative text. If you want to win an argument in Talmud, you quote Mishnah. If you want to win an argument against Mishnah, you quote another text from the same age as the Mishnah. We call those braitot, a baraita. It's another age, same age as the Mishnah, being brought off the cutting room floor from the first editing process. It still has authority. Okay, Bonnie, go ahead. By the way, we are live and recording, but your faces are not visible. Okay, and I may or may not use your names. Raise your hand if you don't want me to use your name online. Okay, good. Go ahead.
Start at the top.
Mishnah.
Okay, Mishnah. The last Mishnah of the previous chapter mentions the subject of forbidden unions among other subjects treated by the Torah. The following Mishnah singles out this topic regarding a limitation on the number of students that may be taught this topic at any one time. The Mishnah then discusses similar limitations for two other exceptional topics. The laws of forbidden unions may not be expounded among three people, nor may Masa Bereshis be expounded between two people, nor may Masa Merkava be expounded by even one person, unless that person was a scholar who could arrive at an understanding of the issues on his own.
Full stop. Okay, so here it is. Ein dorshin ba'arayot b'shlosha v'lo b'ma'aseh Bereshit b'shnayim v'lo b'merkava b'yachid ela im ken hayachacham u'mevin mida'ato. You are forbidden from expounding on, lidrosh, same word as midrash, to examine, ma Hashem doresh mimcha, what is God demanding of you or expecting of you. So to really look into an issue. You're not allowed to do that about all of the laws of people you're not allowed to be intimate with if there are three people present. You're not allowed to do that about creation if there are two people present. And you're not allowed to do that about the divine chariot, even if there's one person present, unless that person is a wise Chacham Torah scholar who's able to come to proper conclusions on his own. And then you can study. So we got to break these things down, and the Elohim Cain at the end, unless he is wise, we got to figure out, does that apply to the case about the sexual prohibitions, the case about creation, or the case about the Merkavah? And we have to answer the question, what the heck is the chariot? Okay? So the Mishnah presumes you know all that. Of course, because you would have learned that in 5th grade, right? We're in high school now, right? So what are these things? Let's take them one by one. What are the IRA? What are the sexual prohibitions? Roughly, don't give me all the details. Okay, sodomy.
Which relatives you can't lie with.
Okay, relatives, like having sex with members of your family. Animals, yep. Okay, it actually doesn't mention oral. It does have a verse that's very well known about men, which has been the subject of great debate and development in the halakhic literature, particularly in the conservative movement. We're not going there. This is not a class that's going to evaluate the morals of the laws. What we're looking at today is the fact that you're not allowed to study those laws in a group of 3 people, whatever they may be. So is it you're not allowed to study with more than 3, but if it's 3, it's okay? As long as one of the 3 is a chacham and he can understand by himself, then you can study with them? See the trouble we get in so fast? I got to know, what other question do we have about this? Trying to figure out questions we need, to just understand that we need to know stuff.
When it says it may not, that to me means...
Oh, it doesn't mean may not like maybe not. It means may not like you may not have a cookie right now, young man. It's may not.
I don't know, I'm getting confused.
Okay, we are getting confused. That's what Talmud does. It spins your head around. Talmud is going to run logic trains. It's going to be a train of logic. And you need to be able to put the train on side tracks as you go. There's a straight, I know there was a train wreck this week. And that's not what I'm trying to do. All right, let's take the metaphor because it's an excellent metaphor. Talmud is, there's a straight shot through from beginning to end that will eventually be, you'll get back to by the time you're done spinning everyone's heads around. There's an initial question, there's an answer to it, there's a lot of distractions, and you're going to come back and you're going to wrap it up in a bow. At some point, the Talmud is heavily edited, so you're going to get that. However, at any single point in that train ride, you might get distracted by a logical alternative. The logical alternative will be, but what if this word were that? And then they just bump off onto a sideline, and they run the same line of logic, but only with that one thing being the opposite of the main line. And they can do that an infinite number of times. And often they do. And what they really like to do is they like to have something that has 2 or 3 variables, and then they say, if not 1, then not 2. If 1 and 3, then 2. If not 1 and 3, then not 2. If not 1 and not 3, then 2. And you get into the logic games of like geometry and everything else that people did in math when they were in school. And they'll run the logic of these arguments. That's the editing process. Most of the original teachings that are in the Talmud don't do that. Right? The Talmud is a manuscript tradition that was heavily edited over time, and we know that the voice of what we call the stam was the logician in many ways, putting these arguments next to each other so that they would flow as if people are talking to each other. Quite often, those people did not even live in the same century, right? That this teaching follows that teaching, and you let them challenge each other. It's the eternal learning of Judaism in a non-chronological fashion. Everything that has ever been contributed to our people is present in the room today. We all stand at Sinai all the time. And you can talk to Rashi, and you can talk to Rambam, and you can talk to Rav Ashi, and you can talk to anybody because we have the literature and we are in conversation with them. That's how the Talmud is run. So you can run the logic of anybody next to anybody. That's going to happen a lot. We're going to see a little bit of it today. Okay. The other question that nobody raised was, is the teacher one of the 3? Does the teacher count as one of the 3 people? Is the teacher the chacham who's allowed to teach? So if at the end, the one who's able to da-da-da-da-da, if that's the teacher, and then the Mishnah means something completely different, because now, if the teacher is that kind of a person, he can teach 3, he can teach 2, he can teach 1, he can teach all these things. If the last phrase, unless he is a chacham who's able to do this, then that would be responding to the prohibition. You're not allowed to teach this, you're not allowed to teach that, you're not allowed to teach that, unless you are this kind of a chacham wise person. I don't think that's what the Mishnah means, but that's another logical possibility based in the words. Is the chacham the student you're referring to, or is it the teacher? If it's the teacher, it gives permission for all of this. If it's the student, it limits the teacher from teaching.
What's the danger in teaching about forbidden unions? And why might it be safe if 2 people are talking, which I would think might be dicey, or 4 or 5 people are talking? What's wrong with 3?
Okay, so the question in the room is a question to the Mishnah. Questions to the Mishnah are what make Talmud. So we're going to get into the Talmud and see if they share your question. I'm not going to answer your question. So the question is, what makes teaching sexual prohibitions with 3 dangerous? Presumably there's a danger, that's why it's prohibited. You don't prohibit things that have no danger. And what's different about that from the creation? Why wouldn't Maaseh Bereshit means creation? Why can't you teach that? Why 2? Why not 3? And then the final one, which was, anyone still with me? The Merkavah, the chariot. Why is that only 1? Merkavah is Ezekiel's vision of the chariot. It is the core parable of Maimonides' Guide of the Perplexed. It is the source of Merkavah mysticism in the Kabbalah, and it is a wacky, psychedelic vision from a prophet in Babylonia. He looks up and he sees, we read it as a haftarah on Shavuot, we see it break open the heavens, and the angelic beasts with the face of this and the face of that, and the wings like this, and a figure on a throne, and the lightning flashing, and the wheels and wheels spinning and spinning, and the wind blowing from behind, and it's the lion faces, the animal face. This is Ezekiel. This is Ezekiel. I'm trying to reconnect. You there? Remarkable. I did, and it did it. Okay, so this idea that the chariot, figuring that thing out, is really prohibited science. Now, in the Aristotelian world, Maaseh Bereshit is physics, and Maaseh Merkavah is metaphysics. And they take an entirely different interpretation of all this stuff. That's not really Mishnah or Talmud language, so we're not going to use that interpretation here. Okay? So we've got prohibitions. They are ranked according to how many students are present. There's an exception based on the wisdom, let's say, of the student. So far, so good? And we know we're talking about these things because it's hey, guess what that reminds us of from the last chapter? All right? Good. Bonnie, why don't you finish off the Mishnah for us, since we've read now 1 sentence in 25 minutes.
Okay, the Mishnah warns against inappropriate fields of inquiry and irreverence towards God. Whoever scrutinizes the following 4 things, it would have been better for him had he never come into the world. What is above, what is below, what is before, and what is after. And whoever has no need for the honor of his
No
creator.
heed. No heed. I'm just correcting the reading. I thought I heard need. Sorry. Go ahead.
And whoever has no heed for the honor of his creator, it would have been better for him had he never come into the world.
All right. They really mean it. Okay? Whoever scrutinizes 4 things, it's better that he should never have been born. What's above, what's below, what's before, and what's after. Was ist das, as they say in French? What do you mean, what is above, what is below, what is before, what is after? What are those questions? Suggestions in the room are heaven and hell, and before and after what? The act of creation? The cosmos? Matan Torah, I heard, the giving of Torah? What? Before and after death? Sure. Could be, right? Lots of possibilities. And the person who asks those questions, they say, better he should never have been born. Very heavy. By the way, the other person, better he should never be born, is the person who breaks off his prayers and says, what a lovely tree. We have that in Pirkei Avot, right? Presumably because the tree is considered more of a source of inspiration and holiness than the God they're supposed to be praying to. Okay, so they're being very heavy-handed here. And what else do they say? Whoever has no heed for the honor of his creator, but the language in the Hebrew is kol shelo chas al kvod kono, your acquirer, the one who owns you. God is master and owner of you and the universe, and if you're not paying attention, and if you're not concerned for that master, the Mishnah is basically saying you're a waste of a human life. That's really strong language. By the way, when I read things and explain them, it doesn't mean that's always my opinion. Right? We're learning Talmud at its own face value. So I'm going to say things that are hard. It doesn't mean that's where we would wind up if you and I sat down and talked about it personally for a little while. Okay? 2 of you, 3 of you, depending on what the topic is. Kono. Kono is the one who has acquired him. From kone, likno. Likno, to acquire. Like kinyan, when in traditional language you acquire the terms of a contract or the obligations towards your bride. Acquiring.
Are we 100% sure that it would have been better for him had he never been born?
Are we sure it would have been better that he's never been born?
Are we sure that that phrase is majorative, or might it be compassionate?
Yes. So the question is it would have been better for him if he were never born. Is that judgmental and pejorative? They're a waste of a human life, as I rephrased it so lovingly, right? Or is it compassionate? I know the compassionate read. I love the compassionate read. Please explain it because it's counterintuitive.
Okay. A person who occupies himself, and this says the following 4 things. So they may all be linked. They may not be one or the other because they really relate to one another.
Yeah.
The first one would be the chaos, the tohu vabohu before creation. The next one would be the world to come. Up would be God's realm, and down would be who the heck knows. And somebody who is occupied can get so bedeviled and so twisted in his or her head, thinking about all of this so intensely because it's heavy stuff. You don't do the dishes, you don't do the laundry, you don't pick up the school.
So the explanation in the room is that a person who becomes so concerned with these deep mysteries, thoughts, they have such profound implications for meaning of life and what is it all, what's behind reality, and they might become so wrapped up and agitated, so perturbed and distracted, so intent, and that they wind up removed or in disharmony with real life, real time, real space, real relations, having their jobs, doing the dishes, being in love, being a parent. Whatever those things are could all be tortured by this kind of thinking. And so the gentle read is, if you spend your time worrying about these things, you will get no happiness. You will not gain contentment and wholeness in life. Just stop killing yourself on this stuff and, find a girl, settle down, just relax, right? Yeah? All right. When was the last time Cat Stevens got sung in a Talmud shiur? What's that?
Does this remind you of it? Because it's a little obscure, as we've debated endlessly, at least in my state of opinion. What does that mean? Why is the Russia different from the...
Yeah. So in the Passover Seder, the comment here is that the Chacham and the Rasha are not so different from each other in the questions that they're asking. A slight little turn, a slight little difference. One guy gets completely abused and the other person applauded to the end of time. aren't those people present in this Mishnah, right? When they're at the right? And again, the rabbis had a taste for hyperbole. Don't think that they didn't. Like they say sweeping statements. If you just read Pirkei Avot and enjoy it, right? The things they say that are sweeping generalizations about the person who does this and the person who does that. They wanted to. They're almost romantic and poetic in their sweeping conclusions about the values of things and where someone goes wrong, because they really felt that you were treading a thin path, right, between getting it right and getting it wrong. When you have things that are commanded and getting it wrong, you can be chayev karet, chayev mita. You can be, get excommunication or death penalty because you did it this way instead of that way. The stakes on everything are high, right? You did this. Take something from the third chapter of Chagiga. If you're handling truma and you get tameh on one hand, you only have to wash that hand. But if you're handling kodesh and you get tameh on both hands, you have to wash both hands. Well, what if you have truma that was prepared according to the laws of kodesh? Now they don't know, right? And the problem is, if you misappropriate kodesh, the penalties are severe. So the system really is not one that's I'm okay, you're okay, do your best. That's not really the ethos of the system, right? All right, let's.
Where do the Talmud scholars fit into this whole thing? The ones that their wives have to do the work, and the wives have to make a living, and their job is to study all day.
Where do they fit in a society where the women have to do everything and they're studying all day?
Are they doing some of these forbidden things?
No, they're not doing these things that are forbidden. They're doing the commanded versions of these things. Remember, all these guys have jobs. All these guys are going to work. They are shoeing horses, and they're selling garments, and they're farmers, and all these guys have day jobs. They're all working.
Yes.
Nobody's sitting in the yeshiva all day.
Right.
That's today.
That's today.
We're not going there. Remember, it's going on the internet forever, and we're just not going there.
But someone could be judging them on the basis of
Could
this
be.
kind of thing.
Could be. All right, let's get into the Gemara. So now the Talmud is going to begin. We've read the Mishnah, and Mishnah does what Mishnah does. It provokes questions. And that's why Mishnah saved Judaism when the temple was gone forever and we dispersed into the four corners of the earth, because we had a book that we had in common everywhere we went that was constantly utzing us and provoking questions. And the literature of questions and answers from the greatest yeshivot, scholars, schools in the Jewish world got assembled. And the Talmud is the highlights, the greatest hits of 4 centuries of study of questions that come from the Mishnah. The greatest scholars, greatest answers kind of thing. So Talmud is going to parallel what you've already done in the last 30 minutes. Let's see. It almost always starts with a question. Next reader, do you want to try? If you'll pass. Would someone down here like to try? 11b3, pass.
Sharon.
Go ahead, Sharon. Amrat Beresha. The Gemara, remember Gemara means study of Mishnah. It's an Aramaic root that means lamad, ha-Talmud. Go ahead.
The Gemara examines the first part of the Mishnah. Amad Beresha. You say in the beginning of the Mishnah, Norme Mase Merava, be expounded by even one person. Now, clearly, if a person is capable of expounding upon Mase Merava, all by himself, he must already be an extremely perceptive scholar. Unless that person was a scholar who could arrive at an understanding of the issue on his own. Thus, such a scholar is permitted to expound Maseh Merkava by himself. But anyone who could expound it by himself is by definition such a scholar. We have already prohibited him from doing so.
Yay! All right, so they're going to start at the end. right? They're going to say something about the Reisha. You said it, the Reisha, at the beginning of the Mishnah, and this is what Talmud will do. It will say the beginning of the Mishnah is this, the end of the Mishnah is that. They don't seem to fit together. Let's ask a tough question. That's typical. So in the beginning it says, you can't what? You can't talk about the Merkavah as a Yachid, as a single person. That means, and they're interpreting it as you alone in your room. Right? So that's not how we interpreted it to start. So the first question in the Gemara is actually going to go based on an interpretation that is not our interpretation. Yay! I like that. It's going to already open our possibilities. But it has a problem if you interpret it that way, yet after you say, unless that person is a scholar who could arrive at the understanding on his own.
It sounds like this scholar is sitting in a room talking to himself.
Right. So if he is, he can do it, but you already told him he can't. So how can he find out if he is if he could never do it?
He's not finding the full deck. If he's sitting there in a room expounding to himself, there clearly is no interchange, there clearly is no conversation. He's
Well,
talking to himself.
He's Rene Descartes. He wants to isolate and think.
He'll be right.
What's the problem? All right. The Gemara. Okay, Jeff. The Gemara. Good point.
By himself.
Jeff, remember,
That's the Gemara.
remember that's the commentary, and it's helping you understand how Rashi reads it. Now, let's hear how it sounds without commentary. You say in the beginning, not Merkavah, yet afterward you say, unless he's a scholar who can arrive on his own. That's all that's written in the Gemara. The rest of it was all commentary. So it basically says you said, not the Merkavah, and then you said, unless he's a scholar. And that is an implied challenge of some kind. The commentary here has told us how Rashi reads that. Now,
Who names him as the scholar that is allowed to do this?
the Mishnah presumes that there's a category of Chacham, which is a well-known category. It means one of them. Right? A Chacham isn't your best student. That's still a Talmud. Right? A Chaver is a non-rabbi or non-rabbinical student who spends a lot of time studying this stuff.
And friendly.
So the Chaver is all the people who come to all the classes all the time. They're friendly. Yeah, they're a Chaver. All right.
That's Gemara talk.
That's Gemara talk. These are categories the Gemara presumes you all buy into. Because they didn't know all of us, were going to be reading this. They thought it was just scholars. This is a text for scholars. All right. Hachika Amar. Classic. This is what it is saying. Ka in Aramaic means present tense verb, and Amar means say. So this is what it is saying. So this is what the Mishnah is saying. Go ahead. Yep.
Okay, the Gemara explains, this is, oh, I'm sorry, here's what it said. One may not expound upon the laws of forbidden unions to three other people.
3 other people.
Two, three other people.
Right? Because of that lamed, li shloshla. So in the Mishnah, did we have the lamed? And Dorshin bi arayot bi shlosha. We don't study arayot with. And now the Mishnah really means not bi shlosha, but li shlosha. 2-3 people, thereby making the scholar a 4th person. How is that going to solve the challenge? Go on.
Nor may one expound upon Maseh Bereshit.
Go ahead.
2 other people. Nor may one expound upon Maseh Berkavah
To a single person. Oh, so that solves the problem. And now we understand it the way we understood it. So what did Gemara do? Gemara understood that there's a way to misread the Mishnah. And rather than saying, don't be stupid, it phrased it as a question and then answered why that isn't so. So by doing that, there are no stupid questions. If one of you had read it that way, you would have said, there's my question, told you so. And then we would have read on together and we would have kind of gone through the learning process and said, there's an answer to my question. Even though that brings me in with the way everyone else was reading it to begin with, but I never got dismissed. Right? So Gemara, to make a point, will ask a question. That's the Jewish style of learning. We don't have a creed. We don't have 20 things that you have to say, I believe in this order, this way, and that makes you a good Jew. It's we throw out ideas, we provoke, we listen to questions, and we answer questions. We may come down to this is permitted and this is not, and I could probably write a creed if I wanted to, but why would I do that? It's not the culture of Talmud. Okay, Jeff, how would you like to go on?
The Gemara cites the first line of the Mishnah. One may not expound upon the laws of forbidden unions in the class of three students.
Okay, so having solved that first little problem, now it's going to say, let's talk about forbidden unions. Okay? And it asks the classic question, my tama. What is the reason? Okay? My tama is more than what is the reason. It's, you've got to justify that, right? There's got to be a good reason behind that. And the only way you could ask that question is if what? How do you win an argument in Mishnah? Cite a source. And earlier the Mishnah means Tanakh. So when you say my tama, what does it mean? You don't have a source. Four spades or something, and then you see their hand, and they don't have a spade in their hand. You're like, my tama. Why would you say that? Now I understand in bridge there's like code bits. Like if I say two clubs, it doesn't mean anything about the clubs in my hand. It tells you how many points I have.
Stamen.
Adding up everything else, whatever. It's been a long time. So they say my tama, that means you don't have anything to hang that on, except maybe a really good reason. So let's hear the reason. Now, you can't just give a reason. The reason still has to be in that same spirit of your answer. There needs to be a source. So the tama is going to be another rabbinic source, someplace where the rabbis argued about something that's analogous or that is similar, where the reasoning is clear, and that reasoning over there might be based on a verse, and therefore we can take the reasoning, which now we know comes from a verse over there, and apply the same reasoning here, even though the verse doesn't apply. You with me? That's how Talmud thinks. So that's what my tama is inviting. My tama is inviting that process. Go ahead.
What is the reason for this restriction? If you will say it is because of that which is written.
So they're going to quote a verse.
Literally, a man shall not approach his close relative to reveal nakedness, which could be expounded as follows. A man refers to two people. His close relative refers to one more. So a total of three.
Okay, we're getting rabbinic math. All right, so they're going to say, Elema, if you say, so the voice of the Talmud, the Stam, who is crafting this entire argument, asks a question, gives the answer, refutes his own answer, gives a refutation to the refutation. He's having fun. Talk about a guy sitting there talking to himself. He's having fun. So he says, if the answer is, because I have a verse that says, Ish el kol she'er bisaro, any man, which is actually in the Hebrew, a man, shall not approach his close relative's flesh, which is one of the forbidden prohibitions. So they're going to say, I've got a Torah verse about a forbidden prohibition where in the prohibition it says man, his relative, which would be a prohibition associated with three people. Got it? All right, so therefore I have a Torah verse that seems to think that three is a problem, right? Now let's follow the logic further, because it's not going to work, but keep going. That's actually a quote. That's probably in Leviticus, would be my best guess. Footnotes telling me Leviticus, 18:6. This is the Yom Kippur afternoon Torah reading in traditional synagogues. Go ahead. The merciful one said,
The merciful one said, addressing these three people, do not approach together to reveal the explanations of the passage of Moses.
okay, so the verse continues, and he says, these people may not approach to reveal nakedness. right? Okay, so what's the logic? But
Merciful, I mean, they went straight to the big guy.
God is harachamana. If you're quoting a verse from the Torah, it's because God is talking. Everything in the Torah comes from God in rabbinic parlance, so they're going to say harachaman or rachmana said this, that can't come together to reveal nakedness, which tells me that it's three. Now we're going to refute that. Where are we in the logic? The logic is, what's your reason? Here's a reason. Oh, if that's your reason. Oh, but if that's your reason, now look at this. Go ahead, but.
But if we now apply this style of exposition to similar verses, such as that which is written, a man, if he blasphemes his God, a man who gives of his seed to Moloch, would you say that this conclusion applies there as well?
Stop. Rhetorical question. So I have several verses in the Torah that say, ish, don't do that. Ish, don't do this. That's a pretty common way to emphasize don't do something. So if you're going to say ish, don't do that, adds up to three, because there's an ish and an ish and an ish, and a 1 and a 2 adds 3, then you're going to have to go and look at all the other verses that say ish, and say it's only forbidden when there's 3. Because remember in the Mishnah, you can't do arayot with 3 people. Can you do it with 2? 100%. Can't do Breshit with 2. No, you can do it with 2 idiots. You don't need a chacham. You can't do 3. That means you can do 2, no matter who they are. You can't do 2 for Breshit. That means you can study with 1. You can't do even 1 with Merkavah unless he's a chacham. Okay? So now we're saying that the prohibition about arayot is when you have 3. And the basis is a verse that says ish. Really? Comes the stam. So every verse that says ish is only prohibited when you have 3? What about a man who blasphemes God? 2 people are allowed to do that? A man who gives his child over to the pagan god Moloch in the fire through sacrifice. 2 people are allowed to do that? The implication of the rhetorical question is no, and your whole proof text has failed. Meaning, I still have what question? Now that the proof text has failed, the question is, my Tama. What's your reason for teaching it's forbidden for 3? So now we're going to go back to that. Go on.
The man who gives his of his seed to Moloch. Would you say that this...
Forget that. Just go to the next bold. Ella, rather the occurrences of a man and man.
The occurrences of a man in these verses are needed to include Gentiles. To teach that they too are warned against blessing, i.e. blasphemy, the divine name, and against idolatry, just like the Israelites.
Oh, they haven't given up on the verse. So they come in and say, oh, no, I'm not giving up so fast. I need ish for the Jew and the Gentile, who are both punished for this horrible sin of blasphemy. That's why I have ish in that case. So I can still use ish for my case, because the ish of blasphemy, that second ish means something different there. So you can't take all ishes away from me. Right? They're all different. And now I need to prove it by talking about the ish of the Moloch kid. Go ahead.
By the same token, this occurrence of a man in the verse, a man shall not approach his close relative, is needed to include Gentiles, to teach that they too are warned against forbidden unions with Israel.
So you think you're so smart taking away all my ishes. I can answer all your ish. They all come to teach something. This one comes to teach 3. Those 2 come to teach Jews and Gentiles both being prohibited. Go ahead.
Thus the verse cannot be used to teach this restriction against expounding on forbidden unions to a group of 3. Go on.
So the verse is available. All right? They too are warned against forbidden unions like Israel's. Now, the Gemara is going to try and come up with another source. So even though the Gemara kind of saved ish, are you convinced? Neither are they. They're going to try and do better. So they're winning the hand with diamonds, and they're going to try and play a better card. All right? So right now, maybe you're winning with clubs with this one, actually, but All right, on you go. The Gemara considers another source. Let's go on and let Stan read.
The Gemara considers another source for the rule that three people may not study the laws of forbidden unions. Rather, it is derived from that which is written, Mishmartim es Mishmarti, and you shall observe my safeguard.
Okay, so I've got another verse, and the verse is Ushamartam et Mishmarti. You shall guard my safeguard, which is, doesn't matter where it comes from. What's happening here is the word Shamartem, and Shamarti is another doubling, and Shamartem is plural. So how many people is Shamartem? How many people do you need for a plural? Two. Shmarti is another person, my guarding. 2 plus 1 is how many? 3. Now I've got a verse that has 3. Go on. And the merciful one said, regarding these 3,
Regarding these three, they are not to be involved in the study of the abominable practices listed earlier in the passage of forbidden unions. Hence, 3 people together may not study the laws of this passage.
so in the commands not to do these things, it says, Ushamartam et Mishmarti, you shall guard my guarding, and that therefore is the context for the sexual prohibitions, and that means, how could you better guard my guarding? That means to not even study this stuff. With how many people? The 2 plus the 1 is 3. Who's convinced? What's Gemara doing? What's going on here?
I think they're giving possibilities.
They're giving possibilities and dismissing those possibilities. What is the presumption that underlies this literature? There is a reason, and we don't know what it is. And where are we going to find it? Not in the footnotes. In the Torah. In the Torah. We're going to find the answer somewhere in the Torah. Are we going to find it on this page of Torah? Maybe. We didn't find it. Now what do? We're going to look everywhere. It could be in any verse of Torah. Any verse of Torah that's not already being used to teach something else. Right? And that's what they're doing. Once you've played a card, you've played a card. You can't play the 10 of spades on the next hand if you won an argument with it on the last hand. If you want to play it on the next hand, however, they will let you go back and take it back, but that hand has to get replayed. Someone else is winning that argument now. You can only play each card once. Each verse only has one meaning. Yes?
In other words, the rule about you shall observe my safeguards.
Yes, Shmartim et Mashmarti.
That could apply to a wide variety of improper behavior.
In the rabbinic argumentation style, when you quote a verse, it can only be used for that argument. And if someone comes and says they want to use it for somewhere else, they either have to say you're wrong to use it there because it means this other thing and therefore cannot apply. In which case, the person who used it in the first point either has to refute the second application or they have to say, okay, I have a verse over here that says it. You can take my 10 of spades. I've got a jack over here that I'll play.
One would conclude from that each verse in the Torah is used for one purpose only.
Because God doesn't stammer or stutter. When God says something, he says it clearly. And every verse has been given to you to tell you something specific and clear. Now, we're going to fight over that until the waters are so muddy we can't see a thing. But we'll get our way through eventually.
And that applies to the field as well.
Any verse that we quote. Any verse that we quote. That applies even sometimes to Baraitas. They'll do that. But usually it's just Torah quotes. Torah quotes get this level because it's from God. That's why they're saying Rahmana. Okay, Ella, however. So now, if you're going to say that, Stan, go on. We're on 11b4 on the left. The Gemara rejects this source as well. Ella mata dichti.
That's the source as well. But now, if we apply this style of exposition to that which is written, and you, plural, shall observe the Sabbath,
And Ushmartim et Matzot. Ushmartem et mishmeret hakodesh.
You say that this conclusion applies there as well.
Full stop. So if we're gonna do to you with Ushmartem what I did to you with Ish, right? So you want to say that it was Shmartem? I got a bunch of verses that say Ushmartem too. You Shmartem. Right? Don't be such a Shmartem. So I've got these other Ushmartems, and they are, you shall observe Ushmartem at the Shabbat. You're going to say that saying Shmartem means the prohibition only comes when there's 3 people. So 2 people get to ride motorcycles on Shabbos? Oh, I wish. 2, right? You're going to say Ushmartem Shabbat only applies to groups of 3? You're going to say Ushmartem et matzahs only applies to 3? Like you only have to avoid bread on Pesach if there's 3 of you? Everybody would go on walks in the woods, right? And the thing about the Kodesh, you only have to observe laws of Kodesh, holiness, if there's 3 of you. Hachinami, you would have to apply your logic to all these places too, which of course you can't. So neener.
You're saying that this conclusion applies there as well, and that these verses refer to where pairs of people.
Certainly not. Right.
Or even an individual is required to observe the Sabbath before he comes to Pesach and prevent unauthorized use of the tabernacle.
Okay, so now this is all running logic. Has anybody taken credit for trying to make these verses work? Nobody. They're all anonymous. The Stam is twiddling his thumbs and he's playing with you. The editor of the Talmud just did this for fun. He didn't mean any of it. And now comes Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi, one of the great Talmudists, one of the heads of the greatest yeshivas in Babylonia. He is the great Rav Ashi. We are now going to hear something that we have to pay attention to. Ella, rather than all this other narishkeit that I've been twiddling my thumbs with you, we're going to quote Rav Ashi. Okay, next reader.
Rabbi Rav Ashi said, what does the Mishnah mean when it says, one may not expound upon forbidden meanings in a class of 3 students? It means that one may not expound upon the hidden details of forbidden meanings in a class of 3. What's the reason?
My Tama.
It's simply logic. When 2 students sit before their teacher, it typically happens that one converses back and forth with the teacher regarding a specific point, while the other inclines to do with it from the discussion. However, if there are 3 students, one converses back and forth with the teacher, while the other 2 converse back and forth with the teacher.
Stop. Full stop. So notice, Rav Ashi comes in and he asks what? He quotes the Mishnah and he asks my Tama. What's the reason? And he says the answer is simple logic. He doesn't quote a verse. Rav Ashi says it's logical. If a student and a teacher are talking, you have their undivided attention. If you have 2, you have the undivided attention of 1, and the other can't get in too much trouble. If you have 3, you have the undivided attention of 1, and the other 2 are talking. Which is a problem, because they're not hearing the explanation, and these rules are critically important, and when they go out to the dance on Saturday night, they're going to ask their cousin, and bad things happen. Right? Because they didn't know they're not supposed to, because they were talking about the Super Bowl. So that's the art. Now notice the flow of the Rav Ashi statement. Does it remind you of how the Stam started the Gemara? He quoted a piece of the Mishnah. He asked my Tama. And then he played with verses and showed all kinds of weirdness with the verses and why they probably don't work. He did that because the original text is Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi is the starting point of the Gemara. And the Stam said, I can ask my Tama too. My Tama usually means you've got a verse. Let's play with that a little before Rav Ashi says it's not a verse, it's really just logic. Now, who gets to say it's just logical? What kind of a person gets to say the Mishnah teaches this without a proof text, without a source? It's just logic. The only people who can do that is a Rav Ashi. You got to be a Rav Ashi to make a claim like that the authority is just logical, and I'm telling you the logic, and that's why the law is move on. Right? And there's actually a phrase in later halachic literature that says you're not allowed to make this kind of a rule unless you are a Rav Ashi in your generation. Right? Okay. This was a taste. We are at our 8 o'clock time. Right? So what would happen from here? What would happen from here is it would talk about each of these three categories. And if you're interested in continuing it, I assure you that the sexual prohibitions only last for probably one more class worth of material, and then it goes right into the Maaseh Breshit stuff, and it stays with that for a long time. Stories of creation, why you wouldn't do it, what Torah verse has told you you can and can't talk about these things, where the above, below, before, and after comes from. There's actually a command in Deuteronomy that they think that comes from, that they're basing it on. They're probably right. The Mishnah is actually interpreting a command of Moses to the children of Israel. It's just fleshing it out more and putting it into very modern categories for them, which are categories that still exist for us. So, for those of you who wish, I'm open to the idea of finding a time for a Talmud class that might meet every week or every couple of weeks at a set schedule to work through maybe the next 5 to 10 pages of Chagiga, maybe even chapter 2, and doing a siyum at some point when we finish that chapter. Yeah, there we go. Siyum means schnapps. Schnapps means they're in. All right? So that's a taste. That's what Talmud does. Okay? It's not going to answer all your questions. It's going to raise more. But it's a process of learning that is based on the assumption that answers are knowable, but they need to be sought. They cannot be sought alone. They need to be studied, and they need to be studied by taking Mishnah and Torah completely seriously as the seat of God's communication with us in our lives. And that's a pretty powerful way to go about keeping your noodle working, right? All right? Final questions or comments? I want to thank everybody who came in online. Enjoy. We'll talk to you another time. I'll post on the synagogue website if we're going to have a Talmud class moving forward.